Good evening, and thank you for attending the October 25th meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. In accordance with the Westerville City School District's COVID-19 guidelines, in-person attendance requires the wearing of a mask or facial covering while indoors. This evening's agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. You may also follow along by connecting to the district's website at www.wcsoh.org. Click on our district link, then select Board of Education, and then Board Docs Agenda, and select this evening's meeting. There will be two opportunities to address the board this evening, the first being Agenda Item 6.01. The first set of comments is relative to Agenda Items 7.01 through 11.04. Please state the agenda items you are referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity is Agenda Item 12.01. There is a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Velardo?
Here.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Here.
Mr. Bell?
Here. Moving on to Agenda Item 2, the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please stand and join us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Moving on to Agenda Item 3, District Highlights and Recognitions. This evening, there aren't any. Agenda Item 4, approve the minutes of the regular board meeting of the Board of Education held on Monday, October the 11th, 2021, and the special meeting held on Tuesday, October 19th, 2021, as presented. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Additions, corrections? Okay, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. That motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 5, reports. And this evening, we have an operations update by Mr. Dorn.
Good evening, Good evening, President Bell, Vice President Dr. Nestor Baker, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall. Tonight's presentation will update you on the work of several departments on the operations side of the district. We will begin with an update on facilities, then discuss staffing plans, transportation, food service, and information technology. We believe that at this time, we are poised to allow more students to attend schools closer to home, increase the number of specialized learning classrooms district-wide, improve spaces for other specialized learning environments such as reading, EL, and intervention specialist classrooms, reduce the number of students who need to be overflowed to other buildings due to capacity issues, increase opportunities for families to opt into all-day kindergarten, and allow further considerations for additional magnet programming. We'd like to be able to do all of this and still keep our focus on being fiscally efficient to stay off the ballot for as long as possible. So let's start with facilities. In December of 2017, a community committee recommended various changes to our district's facilities, including the addition of 2 buildings to alleviate capacity issues in various buildings across the district. As an example, in the 2019-2020 school year, Hawthorn Elementary School had 901 elementary students living within its boundaries. The building's actual student count was in the mid-750s, given student choices to participate in all-day kindergarten at Longfellow, magnet programming at Emerson and Hamby, and open enrollment, but others were overflowed to other buildings without choice. There are other examples of buildings bursting at the seams, overflowed students and choices for kindergarten in buildings other than a student's home school that still persist today. And in many of our buildings, we have specialized learning environments that have multiple teachers and students sharing spaces at the same time. What we are going to see tonight is that we are poised to remedy many of these situations, dealing with capacity issues, and also accomplish goals provided to us in the 2017 Community Committee recommendations. As you can see from this slide from that committee made recommendations in 3 tiers. Their critical tier was address Westerville South right away, add a new middle school to the district's fleet, and then immediately began safety and security improvements district-wide. They also highlighted that it was important that we add a new elementary school and renovations and infrastructure upgrades for buildings aged 55 years and older. And then when funds allow, to begin the renovations of Amherst, which wasn't 55 at the time, so it was in when funds allow, and consider expanding ADK, all-day kindergarten, and magnet programming, and a district-wide furniture replacement. With those recommendations in mind, the district began to work on the development of a 10-year facility master plan. Through a continued process of community engagement, the recommendations from the committee were reordered based on further analysis and feedback from the community. The district began its work with the renovations and additions at Westerville South High School and implemented safety and security upgrades district-wide with the addition of an access control system and improvements to the camera system. This work was funded through the use of existing permanent improvement funds. The remaining portion of the 10-year facility master plan, including the current 5-year plan, was then brought to the community for additional funding support. Before we discuss the bond projects, let's take a look at the Westerville South High School project, funded through existing funds and a Certificates of Participation program. The Westerville South project targeted aging infrastructure, increasing classroom sizes, improving circulation, and providing functional and inspirational design. Phase 1 of the Westerville South project included renovating the auxiliary gym into 2 floors of classrooms, adding a connector addition to those classrooms from the existing academic wings, which helps with the circulation in the building, and the addition of an athletic wing to replace the renovated auxiliary gym. The image on the screen is of the new entrance to the athletic wing and the students' commons or lunchroom. Phase 1 was completed in December of 2020. The image on the left is a new classroom as part of the connector addition. The image on the right is of a project-based learning area where students and staff can break out to work in multiple spaces at one time. That's also in the connector addition. Phase 2 spaces are also now open. Those classrooms were ready to start, were ready at the start of school, and the commons were ready a few weeks later. The image on the left is of a Phase 2 classroom. The image on the right is of an art room, also part of Phase 2. You may notice from the images you have seen so far that for the Westerville South project, we are reusing some of the furniture and replacing other furniture. Furniture was also evaluated, and some of it still had quite a bit of useful life left in it, so we're reusing it. And it's either being incorporated back into this project or being sent to another school to be used where some of that furniture's useful life had expired. This is a look at the Special Education Learning Lab that was designed with input from our Special Education Department and teachers. This space will help students develop life skills needed after graduation. I believe that this room is also open to students from other high schools. Many of the building's specialized learning environments were part of Phase 2. This phase included renovations to art classrooms, the digital media space, special education space, the engineering design classrooms and labs, as you see here in these photos. The image on the left is one of the 2 classrooms that share the flexible lab space between them. That space is the image on the right. You can also see in that image on the right the clean room, which is a room that stores specialized equipment. Also part of Phase 2 was the Commons, or student dining area. Much of the existing furniture was reused in this space, but other seating was added as well. As you can see from the image, this space looks far less institutional, more open, and certainly warmer with the finishing choices made by our design team. Phase 3 began in May and overlapped Phase 2 this summer. This phase is the second floor of the South Academic Wings. It is expected to be completed before the beginning of the second semester. Phase 4 is currently in design development, but it's moving quickly into the construction document phase of the planning process. It will commence in the second semester and be complete before the start of the next school year. Phase 4 is the first floor of the South Academic Wing, so right underneath this phase. And it also will include the Media Center. We also have Phase 5, the second floor of the North Wing, and Phase 6, the final phase, which is the office area and other various spaces throughout the building to complete. We anticipate that all of this work will be done in the summer of 2023. The images you see on the slide are spaces in Phase 3, the second floor of the South Academic Wings. The image on the left is the prior to demolition. The image in the center is after some demolition and the walls were removed. You may recall that this project was targeted at improving infrastructure and classroom sizes. The image on the right is a very recent photo to illustrate where we are in the project. That's really all that it shows. But to know that more work is to be done, but is expected to be done by winter break. To address the remaining scope of the first 5-year portion of the 10-year facility master plan, the district sought funding from the community through a combined issue in 2019. The successful issue in the fall of 2019 allowed us to begin the process of allowing more students to attend schools closer to home and for us to develop better teaching and learning spaces. The new Minerva France Elementary School will come online in the fall of 2022 with a capacity for 600 students and has additional spaces for specialized learning classrooms and kindergarten. The renovations and additions at Amherst will also provide better classroom conditions as well as provide additional spaces for specialized learning classrooms and kindergarten. The renovations of Hawthorn and Whitmire, which are in design now, are creating more space within those buildings for specialized learning environments and kindergarten classrooms. In conjunction with the changes to these buildings, the district is now able to provide additional space in other buildings to serve their students through the realignment process. So outside of adding the new spaces, we have also gone in elementary and middle school grade level realignment. The elementary alignment will change next year with the opening of Minerva France Elementary School. As a result of the realignment, we will have more balance across the middle schools, and for next year, we will have elementary buildings that are aligned with their capacity targets as designed during the realignment process. This has created opportunities to use spaces in our buildings differently, especially in those buildings that were pushing their capacity limits. With the addition of the new SLC classrooms at Amherst and Minerva France, as well as the reduced student counts at Hawthorn and Mark Twain, we are also able to relocate some of the other district's SLCs in other buildings, which may provide opportunities for those students to attend schools closer to their home. Our special education department is currently looking at options for which SLCs will move and which will stay in their current locations. And those changes will be shared with staff and students soon. What it also means is that some of our buildings where the SLCs are moving out of will have more space, additional spaces to repurpose for other types of classrooms. For example, Whittier will now have enough space to have 3 sections per grade level, which it currently does not, and more kindergarten space. Wilder and McVeigh will have more space for kindergarten. The addition of these spaces throughout the district will now allow for many of the kindergartners who would normally be forced to choose an option like attending all-day K at Longfellow. They may not have the opportunity to attend all-day kindergarten at their home school, but more importantly, it reduces greatly the number of students who get overflowed out of their buildings without choice because of the building's capacity limits. Let's take a look at some of the bond projects that are being funded through these bond funds from the 2019 campaign. We will begin with safety and security initiatives. As I mentioned earlier, safety and security improvements began in 2019 with access control and camera system improvements district-wide using existing district funds and a COPS program. These photos were actually taken with our updated system. In the frame on the right, you can see the updated video intercom doorbell system and the new visitor management system, Raptor, which checks every building visitor against the National Sex Offender Database. With the updated video intercom doorbell system, we are now able to actually operate it remotely with an iPad for use with our before and after school programming, allowing for security measures to be in place all day. The bond allowed for an expansion of improvements beginning with the secured entries projects. We've completed 2 phases of secured entries. The projects were designed to create a secured vestibule for visitor entrance into the building during the school day. Visitors must have a face-to-face interaction with a staff member prior to accessing the other parts of the building. Prior to entry, they also interact with a staff member through the video intercom doorbell system. Phase 1 was completed in 2020 and addressed the needs of 12 buildings, either by an increased use in technology or the addition of a new exterior door or partition. So in the photo on the left, that is Blendon Middle School. That was formerly an office. We added an exterior door through that office, and now visitors enter straight into the office rather than having access to the commons or the gym or the academic hallways before interacting with an adult. Phase 2 required significant construction, as each of the entries required the office to move to a different location in the building. And in 4 of the 5 projects, it actually swapped places with a classroom. The photo on the right is of Hamby Magnet Elementary School. And that's the one project where it didn't switch places with the classroom, but that's the old teacher's lounge and kitchen. Of our remaining buildings, Westerville South High School, Amherst, and Whittier will have secured entries as part of their overall building renovation. For Genoa Middle School, we are trying to determine the best design to overcome operational issues caused by separating office staff into multiple parts of the building. At Walnut Springs Middle School, there are space issues with moving the office as we did in Phase 2 projects based on the number of students that are still in the building. So both the Genoa and Walnut Springs projects will be scheduled for the summer of 2023 to coincide with the opening of Minerva Park Middle School to alleviate those space issues. Longfellow's secured entry will be deferred with an explanation given later in the presentation. The new additions are complete at Amherst Elementary School. This image shows the addition of the new academic wing. Students and staff began the school year in this space while the first academic pod was being renovated. That pod is now complete and work has begun on the second pod. The second pod should be completed in February, and the final pod along with the office and media center will be completed before the 2022-2023 school year begins. In the third pod are additional specialized learning classrooms that will help meet our overall district needs. The image on the left shows an existing classroom in one of the academic pods. You may notice partial walls, but what you can't see are that there are no doors. The rooms had little storage and deteriorating furniture. In this building, the assessment teams indicated furniture was to be replaced throughout. We were actually able to reuse a couple of classroom sets of desks, but generally the furniture was all replaced. The classroom on the right is a renovated space. You can see the additional student and staff storage, replacement furniture, and natural light coming through the new windows. There's also improved technology, and what you may not have noticed in that photo is that there are full walls and doors. The second, much smaller addition is shown here in the back of student dining. If you're not familiar with the building, you wouldn't know where it is, but it's the very back left of that image. It was needed to provide more space for students to eat. The cafe furniture was also replaced, but the existing furniture was utilized at other buildings that needed additional tables. We're still in the design development phase for both Whittier and Hawthorn's renovations. In fact, just after 5 o'clock tonight, those documents went to the OFCC and the regional planning group to review. These projects will be coordinated differently than the Amherst and South High School projects, as these buildings do not have swing space. So with swing space, we're able to move a group of kids into one part of the building and renovate another. That is not the case for Hawthorn and Whittier. We are also concerned with conducting a bid package for work that needs to be managed over 3 summers. Given materials and equipment delays and the current market with variability and price escalation and other logistical issues, we believe it will be better to coordinate these 2 projects through multiple bid phases and several separate bid packages. There's a strong potential to begin hazardous material abatement over spring break so we can get started, but we only do that kind of work when students are not in the school building. For the Whittier project, we will be adding an addition as shown in the rendering on this particular slide. This addition will include a music classroom and an art classroom. These spaces will be able to be used by all students in the building, and their current music and art spaces will be able to be used as general classrooms. The design will also include spaces designed for specialized learning classrooms and other specialized learning environments. As we are still in the design stage, I'm only able to show you concept renderings for this presentation. These are of the student dining area and of the clinic. In the student dining, we'll be reusing some of the furniture and adding in some new furniture. Overall, we will be reusing the majority of the furniture for this particular project, as well as for Hawthorn. Notice the new window in the cafe. I'm not sure if you've seen the front of Whittier. This will be so much nicer. It'll bring in a significant amount of natural light. Just concept renderings of the media center. This is the perspective of the new addition, and it was provided to us at our design team meeting last Wednesday. So this is its current state, not necessarily the final state, but it's its current state. The art room will have north-facing windows, which I am told is very good for art, and the music classroom is south-facing. So art on the far side of this, right side of this image. The Hawthorn project will also be coordinated through multiple bid packages. Again, this project has no significant swing space, so the work will mainly be conducted over 3 summers. Hawthorn has no additions, but does have some hard wall changes. Likely, all of the projects, there's an emphasis on infrastructure, obviously. However, in this particular project, we'll likely notice the functional changes of the spaces more so than the upgrades to the HVAC and electrical systems. For this presentation, we're going to focus on the current use versus expected use of the building spaces with reduced students and staff, specifically to the specialized learning environments in both design and quantity. Presented here are just 2 of those specialized learning spaces being utilized in the building today. The image on the left is of a general classroom subdivided into 3 spaces to provide additional supports to students who need them. The image on the right is of a stage that has been converted or repurposed to support 2 additional spaces. With a significant portion of this student population moving to other schools through the realignment process, other spaces within the building have opened up to support these specialized learning environments. In the snippet of the floor plan on the left, you can see room 108. 108 is the room which was occupied by 3 teachers shown on the previous slide. In the snippet on the right, you can see how this block of rooms is being redesigned to improve conditions in these classroom spaces. So you can see a couple of the classrooms are a little bit larger. One of them will be a specialized learning classroom. And then on the right image, the top left and bottom left become 2 separate classrooms for those specialized learning spaces. For Emerson and Hamby, we're really focusing on infrastructure. The scope was defined for each building by the building condition assessments that were completed back in 2017. The first 5-year plan addresses 50% of the infrastructure needs identified in the 10-year facility master plan condition assessment. The expected useful life of those components as identified as part of the assessment will be considered as to determine if the component should be part of the first 5 years or the second 5 years. If that makes sense, right? That we don't want to replace a roof 5 years early. We are very excited about the work beginning on the new Minerva Park Middle School. Site work is currently underway, in addition to the contractor's procurement of materials and equipment. If you recall, the bids for this project came in higher than anticipated. This is one data point that has impacted how we are approaching the Hawthorn and Whitmire projects at this time. The district was fortunate to have done so well on earlier bids that we are still on target for the overall bond budget. And after the bids came in, we worked with Pepper Construction to value engineer the project's budget. At this point, we reduced the bid amount by $552,000 for the contract. And we are continuing to explore ways to further reduce the budget without adversely impacting the design. This is a design rendering of the front of the building. This building is designed for 800 students with additional spaces for specialized learning classrooms. This rendering shows the 2-floor academic wing. One floor is somewhat hidden from the front of the building as the property slopes downward from the front of the building to the back. In our next facility update to the board, you will see progress similar to what you're about to see with the Minerva France Elementary School, but right now all we have is dirt that got moved around. Not very exciting. Our new elementary school is set to open next fall. Robertson, our contractors, are moving along very well and hope to have the building completed before our contracted substantial completion date. The addition of this building, in conjunction with other projects in the elementary school realignment, will have provided us with more and improved spaces for specialized learning classrooms, more and improved spaces for specialized learning environments, such as reading, EL programming, and additional space for all-day kindergarten, and the opportunities for more students to attend schools closer to home. The posting for the new principal for this building is currently on our website. We plan to recommend a candidate to the board at the December 13th meeting, and their first day would then be at the beginning of January. This is important as we begin considering staffing this building. There will be more on staffing the building in just a few minutes, but let's take a look at the current project progress first. Here we can see the progress of the project as compared to the architect's rendering from the front of the building. So that picture was taken last week, so you can see where we are on the exterior of the building. A similar perspective, but from the back of the building. I actually stopped by last Wednesday, and when I walked into the construction trailer there, the yellow metal panels, as you can see right over the student dining there, had just arrived, and it was actually a very exciting moment, the way that our supply chain has gone. It was interesting to see people get excited over metal panels arriving, but it was great to see. The image on the left is from inside student dining. The image on the right is from the inside of the media center. Both spaces have plenty of natural lighting, as do the classrooms throughout this building. Here's a couple photos of current classroom progress. Not much will happen until the building envelope and the roofing essentially dry the building in. But we do get to see, especially on that photo on the right, that some drywall work in areas, they're actually ready for it because that part of the building's dry. Our final building update is on Longfellow Elementary School. Longfellow currently houses all-day kindergarten students bused from all across the district and has a capacity of only 88 students. Just as with Emerson and Hamby, the work slated to be completed on Longfellow represents 50% of the building's condition assessment needs from the 2017 assessment process. But the effects of opening a new elementary school and renovations and additions at other elementary schools have allowed for additional spaces for kindergarten to be opened up at most schools. This has eliminated the need for these classroom spaces at Longfellow. For further understanding, let's take a look at Longfellow's student population by home elementary school. When we look at Longfellow's attendance for this year by home school, we see that our buildings with capacity and space issues are supporting Longfellow with their students. Take a look specifically at Hawthorn, McVeigh, Mark Twain, and Wilder. This is similar when we look at a 4-year average for these two buildings, or this particular building. And I know this is hard to read, but when you get online and watch this again, and you can zoom it in and see what you want. Hawthorn is responsible for about 20% of Longfellow's student count. Hawthorn will now have enough space for all of its kindergartners. Mark Twain is typically the second largest contributor to Longfellow. After the realignment, Mark Twain's student count will require 3 kindergarten classrooms for all of its students, of which it has. McVeigh and Wilder are 2 large contributors to the Longfellow student count, as they are limited in space and that they have only 2 kindergarten classrooms for 4 sections of kindergarten. In addition to students moving to Longfellow, it would not be atypical to see Wilder and McVeigh overflow more than 20 kindergarten students combined to other buildings without choice. These buildings will have 4 sections per grade level, but can only house 3 sections of kindergarten currently. This will no longer be the case for those buildings. With the SLCs moving into other buildings, both McVeigh and Wilder will have more space available for their kindergartners who should attend their building. The implications of all these factors is pointing to the repurposing of Longfellow to meet professional and instructional support needs, rather than house an all-day kindergarten program for which we are now able to provide in more buildings. Repurposing Longfellow at this time, at the same time as we are opening a new elementary school, also allows for some staffing efficiencies as well. Those efficiencies are important to try and stay off the ballot for as long as possible, but more about staffing in a moment. I would like to wrap up the update on facilities by sharing some information regarding the typical capital improvement work that we do annually in addition to these large projects. This work is also driven by condition assessment process, but also includes building voice and recommendations from our maintenance department staff. So we start with the process where we talk to our architects and engineers, and in this case, the OFCC provided some of those for us. We do a building needs assessment annually with our principals, and that's more of a functional assessment, how they use the building and how they would like to use the building. Our members of OPC 138, our maintenance techs, twice a year, update their list of critical items that need to be addressed by the district based on what they perceive the expected useful life is of certain components. This particular year, and it's usually between $3.5 to $4 million, but this particular year, we spent approximately $3.3 million across the district outside of all those projects that we just talked about, making improvements. For the most part, usually about 80% fall into site work, HVAC work, and roofing work. So when you get through those 3 big chunks, there's not a lot left for functional work, but we were able to do some functional work as well across the district. We spent approximately $5.3 million when you include that 3.3 plus our capital equipment and technology upgrades for this year. This brings us to our current staffing plans for next year. The results of realignment and Longfellow's efficiencies have provided us with opportunities to staff the new elementary school and add additional sections of all-day kindergarten and consider expanding magnet programming and still be ahead of our estimated new FTE needs. This data looks promising, but we should reserve our excitement until September of 2022 to see if it all played out as we anticipate. The results of this process will be very important to staffing implications for the new middle school and for staying off the ballot for as long as possible. Here's our process. When we overlay the new boundaries with our current student population, we are seeing numbers that are better than the data we saw from the realignment process where we had to use fiscal year 19's data. If you remember, we started in the fall of 20, essentially, but the data that we had was the previous fiscal year's data to start with. Recently, I shared with the elementary school principals their net changes for K-5 FTE in their buildings using this data. For some schools, for some buildings, there were small increases in their FTE for K-5 only due to some small increases in kindergarten staffing. For others, there were large decreases due to realignment. And the sum total of it, though, is that the net FTE for existing buildings is negative for K-5 FTE because of the realignment, but that's for our existing buildings, and we have a new one coming on board. Those FTE are applied to the new elementary school's FTE needs. So let's take a look at staffing the new elementary school. The new elementary school will need 2 administrators, 40 WEA, which are teacher, WEA members, 6 WESA members, support staff, 6 ESCCO aides who will support our specialized learning classrooms, 5 hourly at will staff, which would be like a cafeteria recess aide or a crossing guard, and 4.5 OPSI members, OPSI 138 members, which would be custodians and food service. Roughly half of the teacher FTE will come from other elementary schools through the realignment process. So as the students move, so do some staff. Half of the WESA positions will come from other buildings FTE, including the repurposing of Longfellow. 2.5 of the 4.5 OPSI 138 will also come from Longfellow, and all of the ESCCO aides will transfer from other buildings with their SLC students. It is important for everyone, though, to understand that the FTE will be transferred to the new elementary school and not necessarily the actual staff member that will be going. And we'll discuss that more in just a moment. The information shared with the elementary school principals only represented the K-5 FTE transfer. Other FTE transfers related to the shifting of needs based on the shifting of students will be in the areas of special education, EL, programming, and reading staff. That particular data is being studied over the next several weeks to determine which buildings will be losing or gaining FTE in those areas with the shifting student population. So in other words, it's relatively simple for K-5 because if you have 100 students, you need 4 kindergarten teachers, 4, and so on. But in some of our specialized areas where kids are getting additional support, we need to know where the groups of kids land so we can make sure that we staff those and support those kids where they land. So some buildings will lose some of that staff because they'll lose some students who need some of that support, and others will gain based on our realignment. Another critical point to understand for this process is how we will be filling the positions at the new elementary school. I previously stated that roughly half of the 40 teaching positions are transferring FTE. That does not imply that the new elementary school will have a large group of new teachers. Rather, we will cap the new teachers at this building at around 15 to 20% in the interest of the welfare of the schools. This is about 6 to 7 new teachers. So the implications are simply that about 33 to 34 current staff will be moving to the new school. In addition to the general classroom, reading, EL, and special education teachers, the other building needs will also include a new specials team and other positions that will not come from transferable FTE. For example, we can't transfer the nurse from one building to another because we'll still need the nurse. So we'll have a nurse, a media specialist, a counselor, and instructional coach. There are positions like that that are non-transferable, so they will be new FTE. The nurse and media specialists will be hired to open the building, but their FTE will be modified in year 2 as an elementary school does not have a full-time nurse or media specialist. The nursing position has already been filled to help us with contact tracing for this year, and we will hold on hiring the media clerk and health aide until the following school year. The posting for the principal's position closes this week. Again, the anticipated board approval date is December 13th with a January 3rd start date. The assistant principal will be posted in the spring. We will need the new principal on board in January to run the staffing process for those next couple of months. On January 7th, 2022, the new elementary school teaching positions, all positions, will be posted at that time. At that time, we will post all known retirements in the district, and we will focus on the new elementary school and replacing our known retirements before we move into our traditional staffing process. And then also before we begin the backfill for the positions where people have vacated their position to move to the new elementary school. So the process for filling the new elementary school positions has been shared and discussed with our related association leaders, but we will continue to have conversations with them throughout this process. And we want to make sure that we honor our negotiated agreements. Once we staff the new elementary school, the district will then look at our traditional staffing process. So the district staffing process is designed to meet the needs, our current needs, and for the benefit and welfare of our schools. Staffing the Minerva France Elementary School, again, begins in January 22, but we expect it to be completed relatively around March. The traditional staffing plan will then follow with the process for the new elementary school. And the traditional staffing plan includes your typical retirements, resignations, and change of assignments, those kinds of processes. And then there'll be some new vacancies to fill positions open by the staff that are moving to Minerva France Elementary School. So as we said, we need about 20 new positions. They won't all be at the new elementary school. Some of them will be new teachers to go to some of our other elementary schools. Also this fall, we will be creating the staffing plan for the new middle school. For our secondary folks, we will see a dramatic reduction in middle school student counts and therefore significant FTE transfers to the new middle school. As an example, we anticipate Walnut Springs to lose 300 students. And when you lose 300 students, you lose a lot of teachers. They all transfer. Now, those 300 students aren't necessarily going to the new middle school, but that's where the FTE will land. Not necessarily, again, the person, but where the FTE will land. We will share anticipated middle school counts with from the new realignment boundaries with the building administration in the next few weeks. At that time, we will be able to hone in on actual new FTE needs. We're hoping to see the same efficiencies through realignment and the new spaces to keep FTE to a minimum while providing our continued levels of programming. This would help keep us off the ballot for as long as possible and allow for us to consider other programming within this parameter. With regard to transportation, with realignment, we may see some shorter routes as more students will be attending schools closer to their home, but not fewer routes. We estimate that more than 10,000 of our students will still qualify for services. And routing is normally a 6-week process, but this year it will need to be completely redone due to realignment. That time frame will be extended by adding a new school and further extended by planning to the greatest extent possible for considerations for the new middle school, which comes on a year later. With the continued driver shortage, we are still challenged daily to meet our current demand. To keep all kids in school, we have to utilize our mitigation strategies that are challenging for everybody, to be quite honest with you. It's very challenging for families when we have to make a change. Very challenging for this building staff, and very challenging for our drivers because they are picking up so many additional things that aren't their responsibility. It's demanding for everybody, so I just want to acknowledge that publicly. Our mitigation strategies are designed to meet the demand of the day, but to keep as many students in school as possible when we have to make decisions. With the continued driver shortage and with 2 new buildings coming online for the 22-23 school year, next year, we will be adding a 4th tier of runs. 1 high school, 1 middle school, and 2 elementary school tiers. Included in these tiers are also the other various routes for non-publics and other programming such as career centers. They'll all be woven in there as well. And the fourth tier essentially splits the elementary tier into two groups. As an example, to illustrate how this helps with our efficiencies, consider the new elementary school in Hawthorn, who are relatively close. The neighborhoods that feed them are relatively close. They both will have approximately a need for about 16 buses. If we could utilize the same 16 buses and 16 drivers to do both schools, we would see an efficiency of 16 drivers to help with the current conditions that we're seeing right now. The national driver shortage has been ongoing for a long time. You may remember this board, I want to say 3 years ago, approved hiring incentives just so that we could meet the demand at that time. But while those are great, they're still not doing everything that we need to do. So please understand this. The fourth tier is not a reduction in staffing. It's rather an efficiency in staffing for us to provide stable, desirable service levels. And given my previous comments regarding rerouting in the district, please understand that this cannot happen overnight, or we would be doing it right now. It will have significant implications in the routing process. Additionally, third-party cab services will have to adjust their routes as they will have their own staffing implications. And we also need to honor contractual obligations to the drivers in the route bid process. So we will study the plan for the fourth tier beginning in November, which is why it's so important to have this meeting in October. During this time, we will look at how this change will affect other parts of our operations. It will also give us time to review historical topics such as high school start times to see if we are able to make adjustments that benefit all kids across the district. When we get to topics such as this, high school start times, we will bring in building staff and community members to talk through what a change might look like and what it might mean to all kids. We will share that feedback with the board before we address any changes outside the general implementation of a fourth tier. Adding a fourth tier will also have implications on how we feed our elementary school students. Currently, food is prepared at our satellite kitchens at Central and South High School and then delivered by our warehouse staff to each elementary school site. A fourth tier in transportation adjusts elementary school start times and may result in changes to how food deliveries are run. This will also be part of the study. I only illustrate this just so that you see how far-reaching this effect might be. Our food service department continues to overcome its daily issues with staff shortages and food chain supply shortages. To deal with staffing shortages, our team members move from site to site as needed to support a school. If a food service team is unable to work in full or in part, we will cover any shortages with staff from other kitchens who are qualified in those areas and can handle the point of sale systems, then backfill additional needs with helpers, which I think might mean us. If we are unable to meet the needs of service in a middle or high school, we will adjust the menus to accommodate what staff we do have available. So when you're short staffed, it means you can prep less. So what we're really saying is that as a parent out in the community, you're seeing changes to menus daily. And those changes are sometimes because of staff, but also because of the food chain supply shortage. So the food service team is still working on, they work daily on this to overcome the food chain supply shortage. A couple of weeks ago, we had one high school order 35 items from one vendor. 29 of them were denied. So they are constantly facing decisions like that every day. What can I get? What can we go out to the store and buy ourselves? Just those kinds of things, just to make sure that we meet the demand each day in the building. But they're doing remarkably well. And we're actually very excited about Phase 4 of South's renovation plan because it is the third of the 3 satellite bistros that will be able to be open. So Central's opened in 20. North's was ready for 21, but we did not open it because of our conditions and staffing implications. South's will be open. They should all 3 be open next fall. So if you recall, a satellite bistro is another area in the building, and these are all closer to the media center for the kids who need to grab on the go, but they can get full access to all breakfast and lunch through the National School breakfast and lunch programs. So every kid is able to access these sites without going through the larger common spaces. And the last thing I'd like to talk about this evening is information technology. The IT department has also been working diligently on the behalf of students and staff. This year, we refreshed 3,000 Chromebooks early to get more devices into the hands of students for the school year. We have also received a grant for 4,000 additional Chromebooks to be used to get devices into hands of students to take home. This is 7,000 more devices than we had pre-COVID levels. Students will be able to use these devices at home as needed while we are able to maintain the device levels in our building for daily school use. Along with these devices, we have additional hotspots for connectivity, and we've also built up our charging cable supplies. The IT team is continuing with building refresh and renovation projects as product is available. I'm going to illustrate some more supply chain here. Last February, we placed an order for desktop PCs. As of now, we only have about 1/3 of those. We're also sourcing the fiber to connect our new elementary school. One vendor has mentioned a 50-week lead time on fiber if they didn't currently have it in stock. On the flip side of the supply chain, though, the 4,000 devices that we were able to get a grant from in September and ordered in September are already showing up in Ohio. So there's not a lot of rhyme or reason that we can figure out. We just know that we're just constantly adapting to the current situation. And the last item I want to point out related to the IT department is that this year is the year for a district-wide refresh on our phone system. Implementation should begin in the spring, summer, but must coincide with the new elementary school and be able to expand for the new middle school the following year. We're currently probably not able to expand to the new middle school with our current system, just based on numbers. I think we're buying some of our phone sets through eBay and things like that at this point. We extended it an extra year, so I think this is year 11 for this phone system. I'd like to close this presentation by thanking our operations team, food service, IT, safety and security, transportation, purchasing and logistics, facilities, maintenance and custodial. Their dedication and hard work to maintain school operations while dealing with the effects of the pandemic. Under these circumstances, they have maintained their commitment to ensure that our buildings are safe, nurturing, and efficient, and we could not be more proud of them for their efforts. Through their work, as well as through the work of our academics team, we believe that we are, at this time, poised to be able to allow more students to attend schools closer to home, increase the number of specialized learning classrooms district-wide, improve spaces for other specialized learning environments such as reading, EL, and intervention specialist classrooms, reduce the number of students who need to be overflowed from their home building to another building due to capacity issues and no choice, increase opportunities for families to opt into all-day kindergarten, and allow further considerations for additional magnet programming. Again, all with focus on being prepared for the new middle school staffing plan for next year and to be fiscally efficient to stay off the ballot for as long as possible. Are there any questions?
Is that all you have?
That's all I got. I have more,
I know
but I'm not going to give it to you.
I really have to frame some questions, but a real quick one, because it came at the end there. The grant for 4,000 Chromebooks, just really tremendous work on that behind the scenes. You mentioned hotspots, but you didn't mention it. Do you have any idea of a number of hotspots that you hope to get, or is that still being calculated?
Well, before we knew about the grant, we were prepared for 200 additional hotspots. We asked the IT department to make sure that they got 100, but be prepared for the second 100 as needed. With the grant, though, we received 300 additional, so right now we should have 400, plus we had some left over from the previous school year. So we feel pretty good about hotspots.
Good.
But we can always add more. That seems to be an area where we can add.
Yeah. Good, thanks. I just want to get them into people's hands, but they have to be able to access it, and so that's the first thing that jumped out. Yeah, let me think through a couple of things. Thanks, Scott.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions ready, and then I might need to come back because it's a lot. Thank you for all of that. and everyone's hard work, especially, I just want to give a shout out to transportation and food service folks. It's really, I know, been a challenge this year. So a couple of quick questions, or maybe not so quick. Speaking of transportation, you mentioned moving to 4 tiers, and you laid out a little bit of a timeline. You guys need to start that in November. So I just want to clarify, is that we're definitely moving to 4 tiers? Is that we're starting to look at it in November? Just where is our thinking around that right now?
Our plan is to move to 4 tiers. We're going to start the planning process in November. And so we believe that that planning process, just conceptually, will take a little bit of time. You know, one of the issues with time is that everybody's trying to be supportive of their team. And, you know, our transportation manager, who's here tonight, probably 4 times a week is driving a bus as opposed to, so time is a critical component to this, which is why we have to start so early. But yes, we plan to get conceptually into that work. We'll be developing some other things over the winter and early spring. We'll really be mapping a lot of things out, but it'll also give us time to take a look at all those other concepts that go along with, hey, if you're making changes, and we've talked about these things before, is this the appropriate time? Or maybe not for next year, but when we open up the middle school, will then that be the appropriate time to talk about things like high school start times and so on? So those are a lot of components that have to be woven in once the basic elements of the plan are designed.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarification, and I look forward to some of those other conversations that
Sure.
can follow from that. Questions that, I don't know who wants to weigh on these, whether Ms. Marshall might or you might. One question is, when we put the ballot issue on, you know, we had our financial projections about what our needs would be, our operating needs, you know, the bond needs. Where do we stand now, especially on the, I guess, the operating piece? We sort of know we're managing, you know, with the value engineering and so on with the middle school, but as far as the operating piece, have there been significant changes in our projections for what we'll need or not? And that could be based on changes in enrollment or other, you know, other variables.
So I'll give you just a little piece of this and then turn it over to Ms. Marshall. So when we went through this process and planning process, and we talked about the operating, based on some of these changes, we've been able to modify some of our buildings to allow more things to happen in a homeschool rather than, so the Longfellow efficiencies came late to the game. So that changes things, you know, and that changes it in our benefit, right, obviously, because we're able to be more efficient with that staff in a different location. But there's been planning, you know, the pre-planning and planning along the way. But as far as, and I know Ms. Marshall's planning on giving our five-year forecast update at the next meeting. So there's a lot more to it, and I'll let her handle it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's been a lot that's changed, right, since 2019. I think everyone knows that we saw significant cuts in state funding because of the pandemic, and we've also had some opportunities to fill in some of those gaps with federal funding through ESSER funds, and we're continuing to look at planning for the ESSER 3 funds that we have. And so, yeah, my hope is to, when we come back in November with a 5-year forecast update, we'll kind of go through all that. We did have projected amounts of FTE in the forecast based on opening the new elementary school and opening the new middle school. So we'll be updating those numbers for the new elementary school with the work that we've done here that Mr. Dorn talked about tonight. So
Great. So come back next month for the 5-year financial forecast party, right?
yes, it'll be riveting.
Yeah.
I promise.
But important.
Very important.
Important. Okay, well, I look forward to that. Thank you. I wanted to ask about the COPS credits, because this is a confusing topic, right?
Cops?
Yeah, the
Okay.
COPS. And, you know, I know we've been through it many, many times. If you could just give a tiny explanation for folks who might just be checking in now, and why you emphasized that we were using existing funds for South and then bond funds for some of the projects, and sort of just talk about where we are with those credits and what that means.
Okay, so, and I might be a little confusing here, but the COPS are not the credits, but I'll talk about
Right,
those too,
yeah.
okay? So COPS is an acronym for Certificates of Participation. previously, our community provided the district with a permanent improvement fund that we could use to maintain our buildings. The COPS program is, for a lack of a better way to say it, it's essentially a lease-to-own kind of concept, where we can receive money up front based on payments that will be coming out of our funds for down the road for X number of years. So we looked at our current, at the particular time when we went through that process, we had funded Point View similarly with tax anticipated notes, but that was coming off, and we were able to maintain our buildings. We certainly needed to do more because the aging infrastructure, which is why you saw the bond issues come up. But we felt comfortable enough with starting our process by renovating Westerville South and adding $2 million for safety and security initiatives, using our current permanent improvement funds through that process. So that was that particular piece. The bond then supporting all the rest of these programs and some other things, like some playgrounds and parking lot upgrades and things like that. So I think we've addressed maybe 10 different elementary schools' playgrounds in some fashion with some of these bond funds. Since you used the word credits, I'm just going to go ahead and throw this part in here.
Okay.
Because it's actually coming back to you hopefully in December. And I keep saying that because it's been hopefully for the last several months. We went through a process where we've engaged with the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. They're the ones who actually provided our facility assessments and our student growth data and those kinds of things for us to use for our preparation. We have entered into a program with them called, we call it the ELP program, the Expedited Local Partnership Program. So during this particular point in time with the OFCC, we are generally designing our projects to the Ohio School Design Manual, and through that, and by meeting certain requirements and expectations for design, we are able to earn future credits for future projects when we become eligible for their CFAP program, which is classroom, yes. So that particular program, which I think we're still about 6 years out, when that particular program rolls around, the state will give us 35% of the money that we've earned credit for. So just for easy math, it's not 100 million. If it were 100 million, they would give us 35 million, right? Then if our next project was going to be $100 million, they would give us 35 million for that. So right now we're just earning credits. But then those two combined, we would be able to use for future projects. So we are working very hard to make sure that we do all the things that we need to do to maximize our credits for when we actually do qualify several years down the road.
Yeah, thank you for that, and sorry to throw the word credits in with COPS.
That's
The
okay,
second
but you
part of the
said it,
question
so
is the
it was an
ELPP
opening.
credits, right?
It was an
Yeah.
opening, so I
There's
took
a
it.
lot of acronyms, but the ELPP credits, and
Yes.
those are two important pieces that are a little bit convoluted and hard to understand, but how we finance these projects, right? I just noticed that you made a point of separating the projects that were funded on existing funds versus those that were on the bond funds, and there are reasons why that's an important point. So thank you for elaborating on those. And I can pause and allow other people opportunities, and I might have some follow-ups. Thanks.
Want me to go? So Scott, I'll first start with thank you so very much to all of your team. You guys are definitely superheroes. All the stuff you get done behind the scenes, absolutely amazing. Very grateful for all of that. There was one statement you said at the very end, and I'm going to kind of get in the weeds. Allow for future considerations for magnet programming. As we are moving students around at the elementary school level, I think it's really important, and I stressed this last week, and I was unable to look at the slideshow. It was not available this weekend, so didn't have questions per se that I could get out to you ahead of time. That we make a commitment to do something with that program. It has been 9 years since it wasn't us, but a previous board had decided that they would cut the program. We have Emerson Elementary, our magnet school program, who has 5 classrooms, That's 130 kids that we impact every single day. That has been for 8 years. Year after year after year, they don't have another cohort. We say every year that it's so important for kids to have mentors and be able to have different experiences. We say the same about our staff, but yet our staff doesn't have anyone to collaborate with there. It houses the gifted program too, which has 6 classrooms, and I think a lot of people in our community think it's actually a gifted program, not a magnet school program. So I am not telling anyone that we need to add a class to Emerson. I am saying that by February, I would like to see a plan in place, what we are going to do with that program moving forward, and for it to be ready to go by next school year when we open up the new elementary school.
Okay?
Okay?
Mhm.
Did it?
Yep. Any support from my colleagues for that?
Yeah, I mean, the magnet program, for those folks who've been around for a while, I think we understand what an incredibly robust program, you know, it has been in the past, and certainly it is doing great things today, but it is much smaller than it used to be. And that's a persistent, it's a persistent area of desire, I think, in this community, is to make that program as robust as, I don't want to say as it used to be, but as robust as it can be in the future, which can be even greater than it was. So I would like to see us talk about that. I would like to see us, I like the words use, a plan, right? To put a plan together to see what makes sense in the midst of all of these pieces, right? Because we have an opportunity when you start moving things around to really think about how the pieces can fit together and what they can do for kids.
Certainly.
So I would appreciate that too.
A few things I have on my mind as regards the magnets. I'll just take that one right up front since that's being discussed right now. I have no problem with identifying a plan for the magnets. I do have a problem with February for implementation next year. Our staff is almost to the breaking point with the amount of planning that we're already requiring from them. I think that we do need to look at the magnets. I think, though, that we need to build in more time to go back and take a look at what the numbers are telling us, take a look at what the applications are telling us, take a look at what the future of the magnet program as an academic offering should be. And that will take substantial effort and substantial energies. And we are at the end of October. To suggest that in the midst of getting the elementary school up and running and looking at all the shifts that have to happen purely because of the cascades that go on for that in our traditional buildings as well as the magnet program, and then on top of all of that, we'll pile on the creation of the middle school and the massive staffing changes that are going to happen there. And then on top of that, to say now by February, we need to figure out what the data are telling us, what they've told us for the last number of years, what the academic component should look like going forward. Is there a desire to change it? If there is, what should it change to? If not, great, but we need to look at that. And then to identify how that fits into the staffing plan, because there was a lot of time spent on the FTEs and how we are trying to achieve as much efficiency as possible around our FTEs and the incorporation of additional FTEs. We would then be incorporating additional FTEs on top of that if we were to say we're going to move the magnets into a new operation for the following school year. I suggest we do a plan, but not so fast. Timing is really important right now. And, you know, all the things that, Scott, you were talking about, I've written a lot of notes. I really appreciated the time you spent with me what did we spend? Nearly 2 hours together talking about all of this. And I very much appreciate the massive amount of work. And what I keep going back to is the impact on every single part of this district's functioning as we get Minerva France ready to open and the Minerva Park Middle ready to open. There is nothing in this district that is not touched by that. And as I look at the efficiencies that you're talking about, they're huge. We have to stay off the ballot as long as we possibly can. It's vitally important. I have said to some of the administrators, and I know that they look at me kind of funny, but my goal is to stay off at least until 24 with not a collection before 25. That's what I'm hoping for, and that's what I'm looking at these efficiencies around. To get there, we have to be extraordinarily careful with not only the facilities planning, the operational planning, but also with the academic planning. One of the things that I very much appreciate about what's going on with all that you talked about is the clear mesh of the operations and the academics within the school district. It's vitally important. It is key to the success. You pointed out that we are poised to remedy many of the issues we faced. And we think about, for example, the overcrowding at the middle schools, how that has impacted everything from space utilization to behavioral components within buildings to teaching stressors. We have significant needs in this district to ease issues in our buildings. And as we open Minerva France and we open Minerva Middle, we are going to see the fruition of what we have spent years working toward. I'm so excited about it. I'm very thankful that you are in the role you're in and that you have the people working for you that you do, because without those clear attentions to meshing operations, academics, social emotional, all of those components, we wouldn't be able to move this district in the direction we want. Thank you for that. It's hugely important. A couple of questions that are a little more specific. The 20 new positions that we're talking about when we look at Minerva France, the 20 new FTE that we're talking about. Now, I am assuming that that is in addition to the 10 FTE that we build into the budget at any rate. Because as we look at the utilization of the spaces, what we also have to look at is not only the magnet program, but the components that we've also talked about. We talked about when we implemented middle school redesign that we intended to move to teaming at 7th grade and 8th grade in addition to the 6th grade teaming that we began. We've also had a number of discussions around the need for reshaping world languages, around music and arts offerings, and around several other components of academic programming. All of these pieces will require coordinated planning. So I don't want us to piecemeal away bits of it by focusing on one component of academic planning that we know we want to do, because as we piecemeal it, we will not be able then to look at it as a whole. So I'm circling back around to what I was talking about with magnets, which is, yes, let's do a plan, but not so fast, and let's do it in coordination with the other academic planning that we know we want to do, and with the FTE planning that we are currently engaged in, so that we have a coherent whole that utilizes the efficiencies that are necessary to keep us off the ballot as long as we can possibly stay off the ballot, and still alleviates those issues that have been hurting us. So I see a whole lot of positive here, and I'm really, really excited about what's happening. We are on the cusp of something huge in this district. And it's easy to say, we've got 2 new schools we're building, we're opening up. Yeah, that's totally cool. I love it. But what we don't want to lose sight of is what this does to and for the entirety of the program that we have here. What it does academically, what it does operationally, what it does transportation-wise, what it does financially, all the whole deal is impacted by those 2 special buildings. It's good stuff. Let me see, connections to the academic plan, I talked about that. Would you describe for people value engineering? We talk about it now and again, but I don't think we've really explained to people maybe as we should right now, what are we talking about? When we're talking about the efficiencies we've achieved, which is a really important piece for us, what is value engineering?
Well, really, the process is taking a look at the way that the project was designed and seeing if there are ways to modify that design without changing the overall feel of the design. So in particular, like just a couple of examples, maybe we select a different ceiling tile than what was already selected, or maybe if we have a specialized component in a particular part of the building, we reduce its square footage down. And I don't mean like a classroom, I mean it's essentially the same thing. So if you saw some of the pictures or visited Amherst, you see that we have in a very small portion of the building some different ceiling tile, right? It just looks different, and it's warmer and more inviting, and it's in a different space. It's not in our classrooms, it's just in this. So instead of maybe doing that at 100%, we do it at 40%, so the design doesn't get modified, so that we still get that feel, but we're able to find some efficiencies that way. In a lot of cases, it's going to be more about changing the materials. So maybe this brick to that brick, because we can't get this particular brick that was spec'd at this point in time, so it's just more challenging, so they bid it higher than this brick that is more readily available. But maybe the colors are very similar and won't change the design. So we're just looking at things like that. So what we really actually asked Pepper Construction, who they really went through the process on behalf of us, was we asked them to make recommendations because they're the ones who actually bid the project and knew what costs they had associated with each component. We asked them to give us between $1 and $2 million worth of options for us to take a look at and make sure that we could still meet the design of the building, the intent of the design. They were able to bring back at that particular point in time when we went through the contract components, I think it was about $1.3 million worth of things. Some of the things we couldn't do. Others we thought were great ideas. And so we've moved it forward with what I think $552,000, and we continue to look forward things. And this is going to be a long process, right? So at some point in time, we're likely going to see, hey, I know we bid this, but we can't get it. How about this as an alternative? And so then there might be a change order that's a deduct from the project instead of what everybody typically thinks of a change order as the project going up, right? So we'll continue to work through the process in that way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it is helpful to know. And it kind of gets to something that I always try to tell people. I want people to understand that you can design beautiful for the same cost that you design ugly and institutional. And what we have been doing with our spaces is really exciting. When we think about, for instance, the Commons at South, when we think about the treehouse component at Amherst, and the incorporation of so much natural light that didn't exist there, going back from the projects we're currently working on to the Point View addition, and the lighting and the natural components that are used there, and the uplift in the environment. We do all of that within the confines of the dollars that are allocated for the project. And it's exciting to watch that take place. And the value engineering doesn't take away from that. And I think that's key when I talk to people about what value engineering is and is not. One more FTE question. When we look at the utilization of the existing FTE, and we look at our efforts to achieve efficiencies around that, how does that impact, or does it impact in any way, the stressors that we currently feel in some of our support positions? For example, our custodial positions and so forth, where we are still too light on those positions and have been for a number of years. Do you anticipate any easing of those stressors?
So a couple of things about FTE. If I want to go back, you made a comment earlier about 20 FTE for the new elementary school. I know it's important to use numbers like 552,000. That's a pretty discrete number because that's a contracted value, right? It's not necessarily 20. So that's part of the FTE conversation we're having. So we may see better efficiency with transferring of reading teachers than we planned for because the groups of students have moved in these whole, a whole group rather than three smaller groups somewhere else, which requires different support. So that's the part of the process that we have to get through from an FTE standpoint. What we're seeing right now with efficiencies only makes our scenario better to improve those situations. We are extremely light in custodial staffing, in my opinion. We're under the state average. So we're extremely light. We need some support there. They're doing great work, though. I mean, they're working very hard. But really, some of our staffing issues that we're seeing are coverage for when our employees are out. Those are the big staffing issues that we're seeing right now. And the amount of teachers that are covering other teachers' classes, the amount of bus drivers who are covering other bus drivers' routes. I think a couple meetings ago, or last meeting was probably, we had 3 MOUs of different associations trying to help out the other associations during their off hours. So we're working through that particular problem. But there are areas where our current efficiencies will allow us to make gains in areas where we have been deficient. I think what's really important are 2 data pieces. One is Ms. Marshall's 5-year forecast, which she's going to share with us soon. But the other piece is the new middle school. I'm not normally like, oh, I'm the super optimistic guy about this, but I feel like we're close to getting that data together. And when we can get the new middle school staffing plan together, like we have the new elementary, we will have better opportunity to discuss things moving forward. And that work we have scheduled for more this fall. So I'm hoping to have that. I won't have it prior to Ms. Marshall's November update, but we'll certainly be able to include anything from it in the May update.
All right, thank you, Scott. I'm not going to ask other questions. I have lots of notes and so forth, but just want to reiterate, poised to remedy many of the issues, the efficiencies in our staffing, the efficiencies in our design, and all of the components that you describe are taking place in a very difficult work environment, not Westerville City Schools, the society at large. As we look at labor shortages, supply shortages, it's hard. Our teachers are having a really tough time. All of our classified staff having a really tough time. And you are bringing forth some remarkable work. And I thank you for it. I thank all of our classified and our licensed staff for what they are doing. And in some ways, it's a backhanded compliment. I think that many in the community do not realize the extent of the difficulty of the job right now. So just thank you.
We've got a really good team.
I would like to also thank you. I know a lot of work went into the development of this presentation that covers a lot. And so I'm very excited to hear about the plan moving forward, calls for better capacity alignment across our elementaries, reducing the number of students that are overflowed is going to be a tremendous asset to the community and to parents and families and students. And really, I love that it will be able to allow more students to attend school closer to home. That has always been a challenge for us, and so I think that's a tremendous benefit. And also, the allowance for the renovation of specialized learning spaces, I think is tremendous for that population of our students. In terms of our magnet programs, I would like to see that be a part of a more comprehensive conversation about the future direction of where we are going with our academics here in the district. I think February is too soon because I would like for us to really look at the numbers and information as it relates to participation in all-day kindergarten, and exploring not just exploring interests, but also exploring the possibility of reducing, if not eliminating, tuition for parents, because oftentimes that can become an access issue. There are parents, families in our district that can be challenged by that. So I would like to see us include that as part of the conversation. And also, several years ago, there were cuts made to our programming at particularly the middle school level several years ago, and our programming has never really recovered at that level. And so I'd like for us to include as part of the conversation, what can we do to expand offerings in terms of electives at that level, as well as offering for students to participate in advanced coursework at that level. So I would like to see, so yes, I would like for us to have a conversation about magnets and expanding the magnet program, but I think I would like to see it be a part of a much more comprehensive conversation as we look at the future direction of the district. As we look at transportation and adding a fourth tier, can you explain once again, with the addition of a fourth tier, what can families expect that to kind of look like?
So what it really means right now in its current stage of concept is that the elementary school tier will be subdivided into 2 tiers. And what that means is that we will have a different start and end time for some of the elementary schools in our district than we will have for others. So what we are doing is we are allowing a bus, and I think Randy Snyder put this really well just maybe an hour ago. You're allowing the bus and the driver to serve more kids during the day. So right now, a driver might be driving an elementary, middle, and a high school run, so that one bus and one driver can only meet that need. But in a fourth tier system, they could do 2 elementary schools and a middle school and a high school. And so we greatly expand our capabilities to do, to get kids to school on time. So right now, this is a really terrible way to look at it, but this is a way to look at it. We've got a lot of kids who are on a daily, I don't know I'm on the fourth tier until they get to school and they realize there's going to be a double back. So a double back is, for our community, I guess, when we don't have enough drivers, so a bus will come and pick up a group of kids and take them home, and then double back to the building to pick up another group of kids and take them home. This way it will be more organized, planned. Parents can plan around it. And I'm not saying that we'll eliminate all of our issues. What I'm just saying is we'll be better, we'll be more efficient, we'll be able to provide more stable service, and we'll be able to look at some of those things that we've done that have made our district special in terms of transportation. I mean, we realized last year, we were unable to provide this last year, but the alternative sites, we were unable to do that last year, but that was something our community, it's not a requirement, but it was something our community had come to expect. So we were able to reinstate that this year, but only within certain guidelines. So there are a lot of things that will make us more efficient and make us be in a position to provide better service, more stable service.
Okay. Do you have an answer? One of the questions I've been getting lately is, do you have an answer for why there is such a shortage of drivers?
I do not have an answer. I will say this, though. Many of our drivers have a 6-hour day, and that 6-hour day starts with 3 hours in the morning, some time off, and 3 hours in the afternoon. You really have to have a special kind of schedule just to meet that in the first place, right? So that's one thing. You know, and if I can work 6 hours and get benefits and things like that, which is what Westerville does, that's fantastic. But if I can also do the same thing and work 8 hours somewhere else and not necessarily driving, then hey, that might be a better solution for me and my family, right? So I just think there are a lot of factors that play into it. the time of day. A lot of times we have drivers who, the drivers that we're missing in the morning aren't necessarily the drivers we're missing in the afternoon. We just have a lot of, because it's a really long day when you think of it from their perspective. They pick up their first set of kids maybe at 6:30 and drop the last set off after 4, and that's a 6-hour day.
Okay, one last question. And this relates to the IT. With the addition of the extra Chromebooks into our supply, are we now in a position where we can offer all students that need a device, we're able to supply them with a device that they are able to take home to do work on?
Well, we're 7,000 devices better than we were a couple months ago. I couldn't tell you what the specific need is, right? I know that we ask a question during registration with PowerSchool. If you've probably answered that question yourself. The reality will be, what is the need? So and our need now is different than it was a year ago when kids were hybrid, or 2 years ago when we were remote, right? So in that case, some parents had devices at home that were available to their kids, except that was the time they were at home too, also trying to use the same device. So where we are right now is in a really good position to start identifying where we need to start allocating these based on need to our students. And the funny thing is that Dr. Hopkins is working on that right now, right? His team is working on how to do the allocation. In fact, a lot of things that you've talked about tonight, I have to apologize to Dr. Hopkins after this meeting's over, because my operations update is really, he's going to be the next one up on the block to share all of his ideas with you. But we're in a significantly better position than we have been. We don't have a device for every student, but we're significantly better than we were.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to revisit the magnet thing again. I don't ever want to stress the staff out. Unfortunately, we don't know if we'll ever go back to so-called normal, or things will not be as hectic and busy, right? We just don't know that. It's 130 kids that we've been doing this to, that have been impacted for the past 8 years. I have been told year after year, next year. We've made lots of great choices. We've added all-day K. We've made significant changes to the middle school programming, as well as the gifted program, and those are all great things. I just don't think it is fair to wait any longer, especially when we're making these changes at the elementary school level. As far as FTE and staffing, cost savings is always a top priority for me. We know that's budgeting. We know that's part of planning the 5-year forecast. So that's a choice. That's a choice that we would make here and there. We have asked the staff a couple times in the last 8 years at the magnet programs what they saw for the future, asked for their ideas. So we have engaged them a couple of different times. This community said in 2017, when funds allow. So I want to bring that up one more time. And this community likes choice. So if we want to look at data, we need to look at data from 10 years ago, because 10 years ago is really the data when these schools were thriving, the top schools in our state, right? Top schools. These schools give choice to our community. I'm going to channel some Cindy Crow here and just keep beating this drum. I'm going to keep asking for this over and over again, because I think it's important. I think that we need to do something for these kiddos. So just letting everyone know where I stand.
Really, Scott, a great report. I appreciate, and I know you deflect to your team, and I think you do have a really good team, but it takes somebody at the head kind of guiding, and so thank you for that. I took a lot of notes. I circled some things. President Bell highlighted the special ed learning labs, the special learning locations. I just can't tell you how good I think that is. It's particularly now that we're doing this special education audit, trying to figure all of that out. I just love that those kids that are too often left behind in all of our expansion of other areas of education, gifted, all the other. I just think those kids deserve a lot more than I know we want to give to them. Absolutely, I know we do. I know Barb Wallace is really wanting to do more for that, and I know you as well. Reducing the overflow, I think, is I think it's a tremendous thing, because I hear from parents when they are forced to leave the school that hey, I thought I was going here, and now I got to go here, and it's just a frustrating thing. We haven't mentioned, I don't think anybody up here has mentioned the safety and security updates that have occurred and are occurring. And I don't know if we can go back to your slides, but I would, I don't know if you can do that, or Jill, if you can go back to the slides. I would look at slide 2. I love the idea of tending closer to home. Slide 2, Jill. Yeah, that one. Thank you. I just think that we might all need to just pause, take a breath up here and out there, and say, okay, 4 years ago, December 2017, the community said, get these things done. Critical means like, okay, get it done. Important means, yeah, I want you to get this done. And when funds allow, yeah, let's get moving in this direction. But there is a prioritization up there, and I just want us to all just breathe in some celebratory joy that the community have provided funds, and we have been able to do some significant things, because unfortunately, safety and security is significant. Unfortunately, safety and security is significant. And I have been in all of our buildings all the time, and I am deeply moved by the fact that you have to really, you have to be invited in before you get to the level of our children. And I would like us just to take a breath and to acknowledge that. Attending closer to home, the FTE, I really like the idea of new teachers at Minerva France. I'm going to stop calling it the new elementary school. I'm going to start calling it Minerva France. I love that name and what we're trying to do there. But I love the fact that, yes, there'll be some new teachers there. We think some new teachers there. But it's really going to be staffed with some experienced teachers, and I would contend we have some of the best experienced teachers out there. You know what I thought of when you talked about the bistros opening up? Because just a little bit before that, you talked about food chain supply issues. And I thought, okay, so we're opening up these bistros. When is this food chain supply issue going to be dealt with? But I mean, it's nothing you can do about that, but that kind of jumped into my head. I asked you about the hotspots things already. One question, I don't know, through OFCC, the credits, Ms. Altman's word, she threw it at you, so you grabbed it and ran with it, so I appreciate that. The credits, I don't know how else to ask. Is there a time limit on OFCC saying, well, you got to use these credits in 10 years, 15 years, whatever? That's not in there right now.
Our current time limit is the OFCC making us an eligible district. So we could conceivably start this process in 3 years if we were an eligible district in 3 years.
Gotcha.
When we started the process with the OFCC, we were a couple years out, and then a couple years later, we were 4 years out, and then a couple years later, we were 6 years out. So that is unfortunately the scenario we're facing right now. We're waiting for that to start shrinking back down, and then we're a couple years out again, which at that point in time, then we can say, okay, well, we're a couple years out, here's this money in front of us, what can we do in our community with our buildings to make this even a better district, and take that to our community for a question.
Yeah. Scott, can I add a little bit to that? And Ms. Marshall, if I get it wrong, correct me, but so when we say eligible, OFCC has an allocated amount of money annually. They have a priority list of all the school districts in Ohio that they've been checking off for years, right? So based on school needs and how much the eligibility, once you become eligible, you're then required to raise local funds to cover the rest. So as Scott mentioned, I think the state share is 35%, 35 cents on the dollar. The rest is local, right? So they have to say, okay, you're up, go to your community and raise their additional funds. The beauty of what we're doing is storing away those credits means the amount of local funds we need to fund the project changes, right? So our local contribution is already offset by that, plus the 35% they're gonna provide. And as we look at our financial forecasts, Ms. Marshall, again, present, we do have some opportunities in the future of current levies, bond issues that offer opportunities for a community to consider what they want to do in the future with those current levies. So all those pieces come together, and I think kind of tie the bow together from Scott's presentation is this is the forward-thinking piece. We started the year talking about forward-thinking. This is the forward-thinking piece. All the implications of what we're doing, and how does that tee us up for our community in the future to use the resources we have available to do as much as we can with what we have, to delay the need to ask the community for more operating dollars, and align future needs with opportunities we see with our community to make it as inexpensive as possible to keep ourselves moving forward. So trying to capture all that in what we're doing. So I think I got that pretty correct. If I didn't, Ms. Marshall will correct me, but that's where that eligibility piece comes from.
Yeah, that's correct. So the bond issue piece, so that's not part of the forecast, but that is part of our long-term planning as we look at the district's finances.
If I could just point out two things. This is the 2017 committee recommendation. This isn't where the planning stopped. If you recall, we went back to the community, and it was reorganized. Amherst got moved to the top by our community after we reassessed a lot of data, and safety and security was a really big piece of that. No walls, no doors, right? So that's one piece. But if you probably heard me say a couple of times tonight, 10-year facility master plan, first 5-year plan. There will have to be a second 5-year plan for this 10-year facility master plan, which is the part we're hoping rolls into becoming eligible with the OFCC. So don't take them as 10 consecutive years. Take them as a 5-year window and a 5-year window surrounded by however it works out best for our community.
Which, yeah, just brings me to my last. I'm looking at the 10 as 5 and 5, kind of like the bid packaging, needing to go year, instead of one big, based on some fluctuating supply chain. And the slide after that one, don't go back to it. Jill, don't worry about going back to it. But I'd like people to take a look at that, because that has a very extensive timeline. And so you're going to go back. Yes, thank you, Jill. I owe you, don't I? I just want people to see that. You know, I don't want to get into weeds. I'm trying to really focus on what your report brought to us. But I am all in favor of creating options. I just think that with what has been placed upon the teaching staff in the last 18 months, what has been placed upon the administration the last 18 months, and really more, right? I would be hesitant to bring a whole nother package piece to this. And nobody believes in giving more options than I do. But I just think there's a time. And so I would focus on where we are right now. Really good stuff, though, Scott. Thank you.
Can I just make one quick follow-up request? I promise not a bunch of questions. But Mr. Dorn, you alluded to the fact that this is also partly really Dr. Hopkins' presentation. Under the teaching and learning side, this has really important implications. So you all may have it in your minds to sort of do the teaching and learning side of what these, what these projects mean for kids every day and for teachers every day at some point in the future. But I would just really encourage that presentation. I look forward to seeing it. So I'm seeing some nodding in the back of the room. Thumbs up from Dr. Hopkins.
I didn't mean to assign him a presentation.
That's okay, I was going to ask anyway.
FYI.
It's really, I was going to ask anyhow. So I really would look forward to people being able to see through the teaching and learning side of the house, that staff, the administration, what differences these are going to make. I think we all have a good sense of it, but thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Dorn. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, 6.01, public comments that are pertaining to specific agenda items. This evening, we don't have any. So moving on to agenda item 7, which are our financials. Agenda item 7.01, new audit committee appointments. May I please have a motion and a second to appoint Javon Williams and Scott Pryfogle as new audit committee members?
So moved.
Second?
Ms. Marshall?
Yes, thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So if you remember, in September, we posted the positions for 3 audit committee members. We had 3 seats vacant at the end of last year, and we received 1 applicant for the position that we posted for. So we had it open for a couple of weeks. We had 1 applicant, Javon Williams, who is more than qualified to serve on our audit committee. Javon is a parent in the district, and she also works as an internal auditor, and so she'll be joining us with your approval tonight. And we also reached out to last year's applicants. So last year, we had received 10 applications. So we reached out to last year's applicants, and Scott Pryfogle has agreed to serve with us this year. So we're very excited to have him on board. Scott is a financial associate and planner and analyst, and he's also a parent in the district. We have 3 returning members from the previous year. Eric Kyer, he's agreed to serve another year for us. He had initially ended his term, but has agreed to come back and help fill in that 3rd spot that we had vacant. And Dory Christian and Sue Holschler will continue on the audit committee as well.
Okay, any questions? Okay, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Ottman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo,
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell.
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 7.02, may I please have a motion and a second to approve the financial report and investments for September of 2021?
So moved.
Second?
And Ms. Marshall, would you please share with us about this?
Yes, thank you again. This month, we're going over the September 30 month-end financial report for the general fund. We ended with $83.3 million in receipts, year-to-date expenditures of $50.8 million, and we ended with a general fund unencumbered fund balance of $164.6 million. For all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $104 million, year-to-date expenditures of $76.4 million, and we ended with an unencumbered fund balance for all funds at $260.1 million. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Ms. Marshall? Okay, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 7.03. May I please have a motion and a second to approve a resolution to approve the purchases in accordance with ORC 5705.41D1 and Board Policy 6320.
So moved.
Second?
Ms. Marshall?
Yes, thank you again. So these are what we call then and now purchase orders. So this is a case where we have a purchase order that is dated after an invoice date. This is for Triad Architects with the renovations for Hawthorn Elementary. We did actually have a purchase order in at one time for this that was closed in error, and the money is available in the budget, but because it's in excess of $3,000, it does need to be approved by the board.
Okay, any questions? Okay, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velarde?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 8, our personnel consent agenda that is comprised of agenda items 8.01 through 8.13. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Reeves, would you please share with us?
Yes, and thank you, and good evening, President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Mrs. Marshall. I would like to present to you for your consideration tonight's personnel consent agenda. The items in tonight's agenda mostly represent our regular action items with regard to resignations, hirings, and contract status changes. There are a few items, however, to be noted in tonight's agenda. We have 4 retirements this evening, and please join me in congratulating David Elliott, retiring from Westerville Central High School with 10 years of service to the district. Stephanie Fitzpatrick, retiring from Wilder Elementary School with 16 years of service. Carol Stanley, retiring from Walnut Springs Middle School with 23 years of service. And Bonnie Verhage, retiring from Hawthorn Elementary School with 15 years of service. Their work in the district equals a combined 64 years of service. Now, 64 years takes us back to 1957. And this is for Mr. Hershiser, who was a big Dodgers fan, because in 1957, the Dodgers agreed to move from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. Major John Glenn set a transcontinental speed record by flying a jet from California to New York in just 3 hours and 23 minutes. He made good time. 9 courageous young black teenagers integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, and are immortalized as the Little Rock Nine. And finally, in 1957, saw the passing of literary figure Laura Ingalls Wilder, the namesake of one of our amazing elementary schools. We have 4 classified resignations offset by 10 classified recommended hires. And as has been done earlier tonight, this also gives me the opportunity to give a big shout out to our HR Director, Carrie Dennis, and her amazing team throughout the district working to ensure that students arrive on time, they arrive in a clean and safe building, they arrive with a hot meal ready, and that parents have a friendly voice on the other side of the phone. Their job has become increasingly difficult, as recently highlighted last Friday in our weekly news update, and in the front page article of yesterday's Columbus Dispatch featuring our own Mrs. Dennis. I'd like to say once again, as we've done tonight, how much our district appreciates all of their work. And lastly, the board will find 3 MOUs for consideration, all with the Westerville Education Association, each of which allow for additional support opportunities at the elementary level. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Reeves? Okay, thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 9, old business. There's no old business to cover this evening. Moving on to agenda item 10, new business. Agenda item 10.01, a first reading for policy 7300. Mr. Dorn, would you please share with us about this?
You have to do a motion. Oh, the first reading. I'm sorry.
First reading.
I promise this one will be much shorter. Again, good evening, President Bell, Vice President Dr. Nestor Baker, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall. Tonight you have a revision to policy 7300, disposition of real property, personal property in front of you. This policy has been revised to reflect the change in the status of unused school facilities required by House Bill 110. Specifically, the board shall offer such facilities for lease or sale to the community schools or other such agencies specified in the law and in the policy. If you recall, last year, House Bill 164 reduced the amount of time for lack of use for school operations from 2 years to 1 year. This legislation increased restrictions to include a building in which less than 60% of the building was used for direct academic instruction during the preceding school year. The board shall offer such facilities for lease or sale to community schools or other such agencies specified in the law and this policy. At this time, we do not have any unused school facilities, nor any that fall under 60% threshold. This revision reflects the current state law and should be adopted to maintain accurate policies. Thus, it is recommended by the board to adopt the changes in policy 7300 as written.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you, sir. Moving on to agenda items 10.02 and 10.03, first reading for policy 8600 for transportation and policy 8651. Mr. Snyder, would you please share with us about these?
Certainly. Thank you, President Bell, Vice President Dr. Nestor Baker, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall. Before you, ultimately, I'll put these two together, if you will. Policy 8600 is a revision that brings the board policy consistent with recent updates in the state requirements. I do want to call out that Westerville City Schools continues to exceed state minimum requirements. Major call out is we continue to provide transportation services for our high school students. And that is policy 8600. And forgive me, since this is first reading, if it's okay with you, policy 8651 is updating our policy, really just reorganizes our policy when it comes to the use of non-routine school bus use, rather. And a specific call out, there is new language that, again, is consistent with recent adjustments to state requirements and the use of our school buses in the declaration of an emergency, whether it be by a local government entity or also a nonprofit entity, again, in the use of an emergency situation. And therefore, these two policies are recommended. The updates, again, as these two policies were due for revision review according to the board's schedule.
Okay, any questions?
No question, just a comment. Listen, I don't speak on behalf of the board, but I am quite sure the board would all concur that what you all are doing at this time is just really tremendous work. Please take, if it's not on behalf of the board, then just from me, please take from all of us thanks back to the barn,
Yes.
into the offices, and we know that they're on thin lines. What you do is important. What you do is very important. So please, from us, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to agenda items 10.04 and 10.05, a first reading for policy 5111 and 5111.02. Mr. Hopkins.
Thank you. Good evening, President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall. Presenting for your consideration the revisions to policies, as you mentioned, 5111 as well as 5111.02. 5111 adds new language so that children of active duty uniformed service members who are subject to possibly a transfer or relocation order to be permitted to apply for enrollment in the same manner as resident students, in accordance with the provisions of the Interstate Compact on Educational Opportunity for Military Children. This is a new addition to the current policy that we're recommending to add so that we'll be aligned with current laws and regulations. 5111.02 is very similar. What it does is it adds specific language around how active duty uniformed service members may apply for enrollment and, if applicable, also how these children may be permitted to participate in technology-based educational opportunities that therefore will minimize the potential disruptions caused by families transitioning from one military installation to another. And again, we recommend that both of these be adopted.
Thank you. Any questions?
I actually just have a quick question about the existing policy and practice. So right now, without these policy additions, if a military family knows they're getting transferred to Westerville, how does that look different than what's in the policy?
What's in the policy right now is that there are provisions, for example, children in foster care, in different ways that they can, this adds specifically uniformed servicemen and their families to actually be permitted to do so. We already have an outstanding practice of working with our military families, so this just kind of codifies it.
Just codifies it.
Yes,
Yep. Great, thank
exactly.
you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Hopkins. Moving on to agenda item 10.06 for a first reading of policy 6114, cost principles spending federal funds. Ms. Marshall.
Thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So this policy has been revised to provide greater detail and allowability guidance for districts regarding expenditure of federal funds. There's been significant increase in federal funding provided to school districts. And while the policy has accurately referenced definitions and restrictions cited in various sections of the Uniform School Federal Guidance, greater specificity has been requested by program reviewers and auditors. It is recommended that the board approve these revisions to maintain accurate policies and keep the district in compliance.
Any questions for Ms. Marshall on this one? Okay, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10.07 for a first reading, policy number 8740, bonding. Ms. Marshall.
Thank you, President Bell, members of the board. So this policy has been revised to reflect the insurance option made available through House Bill 291, which authorizes school districts to use an employee dishonesty and faithful performance of duty policy in lieu of surety bonds. This provision was added to policy 1310, employment of the treasurer CFO in 2019. The provision of law was further modified in House Bill 444 to allow for the purchase of insurance in lieu of bonds at times other than the time of initial employment of the treasurer, and to extend this allowance to all officers, employees, and appointees who are responsible for money and property. Note that the insurance must be an amount equal to or greater than the amount required by the board for a surety bond. And we do continue to maintain surety bonds as well, just for the board's knowledge. But it is recommended that the board adopt this policy to reflect current law and maintain accurate policies to keep the district in compliance.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you, Ms. Marshall. Moving on to agenda item 10.08 for a first reading, policy number 8400 regarding school safety. Mr. McElroy, welcome. If you would please share with us this evening.
Thank you very much. Good evening, President Bell, Vice President Dr. Nestor Baker, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Mrs. Marshall. Tonight you have a revision to policy 8400, school safety. This policy has been revised to reflect the change that parental consent is required prior to student participation in emergency management tests. The new language is strongly advised because the Ohio Administrative Code does not make it mandatory. However, it does state that schools should obtain parental consent if students are going to directly participate in emergency management tests. The emergency management tests are tabletop exercises, functional exercises, and full-scale exercises. Each year, school administrators are required to conduct one of the 3 emergency management tests over a 3-year cycle to validate the procedures in the school emergency management plan. This revision reflects the current state of the law and should be adopted to maintain accurate policies. Thus, it is recommended that the board adopt the changes in Policy 8400 as written.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Moving on to Agenda Item 11, standing business. Agenda Item 11.01, donations. May I please have a motion and a second to accept these donations made to the district?
So moved.
Second?
Are there any questions about any of these?
Oh, of course, just we're always really grateful. And I want to just point out that the transfer, there were donations to the lunch program, lots of wonderful donations, but I always think feeding students is really important. So thanks to everybody who made these donations.
Okay, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. And with that, the motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 11.02. May I have a motion and a second to approve these overnight or out-of-state field trips?
So moved?
Second.
Ms. Baldwin, would you please share with us about these exciting trips?
Yes, good evening, President Bell, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. We have a request for 2 trips, one for the Westerville North softball team and the other for the Westerville North baseball team to participate in out-of-state trips during spring break this year. We have discussed with both those teams the idea that trip plans can change at any time due to changing conditions, and they are aware of the expectation that upon returning to school, they show vaccination status or a negative COVID test within 72 hours of returning to school, like our other out-of-state field trips have been required to do. And then I did speak with Mr. Ellifritz, the athletic director, about the cost, because I know there's a question last time regarding a trip, and while there is a family cost, Mr. Ellifritz shared that programs and partnerships like their athletic boosters and neighborhood bridges ensure that no athlete is unable to attend due to financial need.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
That last piece is tremendous. Thank you. Mrs. Altman, I think you asked that question last time about cost and inclusion, and that's just thank you for bringing that secondary piece, and please take it back to the AD and all those folks. Tremendous.
Yeah, thanks for the information. Appreciate you following up on that. I do just actually have one question, which is in terms of COVID protocols. I mean, obviously, these are several months away, so probably haven't nailed down exactly what they need to do on these trips in terms of COVID protocols, but as you said, they've been made aware that the situation could change.
Mm-hmm.
So will there be a discussion with them about, a couple weeks before the trip, looking at what the COVID situation is and what kind of protocols they'll need to follow? Or just, I know we're all sort of figuring this out as we go. Just wondering what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm happy to check in with those teams, and as we look at any of our trips coming up, making sure that we're doing the best we can to keep our students and our staff healthy, especially when they participate on trips like this.
Yeah, we'll get closer to the time and see what things look like.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to Agenda Item 11.03. May I please have a motion and a second to approve resolution to approve the graduation requirements for the class of 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Baldwin, would you please share with us about this?
Yes, I'd love to. So tonight's request is to provide flexibility for students who are eligible to graduate during this school year, the 21-22 school year, to the extent permitted by law. And this particular resolution would allow students that were in 11th and 12th grade during last school year, 2020-2021, and who either took or retook an end-of-course exam, or who were unable to take or retake an end-of-course exam for any reason that year, to use the student's final course grade in lieu of a corresponding end-of-course examination in order to qualify for their diploma. So currently, the students in class of 2022 have 3 options in addition to their 20 credits that they have to earn in order to graduate, and that's to earn 18 points over 7 end-of-course exams, earn an industry credential and a qualifying score on the work keys exam, or earn a remediation-free score on the ACT or SAT. And so this provides some flexibility in that end-of-course exam, because we know our students were going through a lot of adjustments last year, and so it would benefit our students, say maybe they weren't able to take the test for some reason, or they took the test and scored a 1 or 2, and that affected maybe their point accumulation for graduation, but maybe they got a B in the course. So this would give them additional points for that grade that they earned in that course, and support their opportunity to graduate with that graduation pathway. And for our students this year too that maybe aren't able to access one of those pathways, they do have the ability to access the class of 2023 graduation requirements and beyond, which is another series of steps and graduation seals that our buildings and our school counselors are working closely with families to make sure that they have an option to graduate this year.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Baldwin?
Just one. Do you have a sense roughly of, the number of percentage of students we may be talking about who would want to take advantage of this?
I was thinking actually before I came up here, I don't have numbers for you this evening. I know our teams are really looking at all of our rosters right now and the points, because we have December testing opportunity for students in order to earn points. So we are looking at those, and I could have a number update for you as we narrow those students down and make sure that they have every opportunity they can to earn a diploma.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes, that motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 11.04. May I please have a motion and a second to adopt a resolution to adopt a Calamity Day alternative makeup plan?
So moved.
Second?
Dr. Knapp, would you please share with us about this?
Good evening, everyone. Beginning in the 2014-2015 school year, per House Bill 153, districts have the opportunity to maintain their school calendars by making up calamity hours. The resolution is to adopt a Calamity Day alternative makeup plan that includes the use of up to 3 days in which online lessons will be utilized. The Ohio Department of Education requires that the district approve this yearly to provide online learning opportunities for students in lieu of attendance. In fact, I actually have the very first one. I wasn't going to do a history lesson, but then Reeves did one. So, and I have the 14-15 with President Dr. Nesterbaker up here, and Bart and Rhonda and Dr. Kellogg. So I thought that was pretty funny. So we do this yearly. In the plan, as you'll see, traditionally they like for teachers to do this by November 1st. We're doing it a little later this year, given some different circumstances, and so we have worked with WEA to have that be December 1st, that teachers have these available. But it's something, again, that we've been doing for years and years. We did not do it last year. I think we had other things going on, but we've done it every year since 14-15.
Okay.
Questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes, and that motion carries. Moving on to agenda item 12, public comments. Let's see here. In accordance with Westerville City School District's COVID-19 guidelines, each speaker is required to continue to wear a mask or facial covering while addressing the board. Failure to comply with these guidelines will result in the speaker being reminded of the mask requirement. Time will not be credited back to the speaker, and any additional failure to comply will result in the forfeiture of any remaining time. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board. A timer will be shown on the screens in the front of the room. If you have any information that you would like to leave with the board, please hand that to Mr. Hershiser in the back of the room. And Mr. Hershiser will also call time when 5 minutes has elapsed. Please keep your comments professional, avoid the use of inappropriate language, and refrain from identifying individuals in the event of a complaint. Please address your comments to the board and not to the audience. Board members reserve the right to respond immediately or withhold comment in order to conduct appropriate research and follow up with the speaker at a later time. And our first speaker for this evening is Thad Rayrig.
Actually, Rarig.
Rarig.
Thank you for letting me address you. I just really have a question. I would like to see if I can get a printout of essentially the required English or literature books that students are expected to read in class. I would like it on a district-wide basis. Doesn't have to be separated by the 3 schools, but I would like to see the reading list. I realize it's going to take some work, but I'd prefer to have it sent to me, and I'll be glad to give you my email address if that's what's necessary. So if you have a comment about that, that's okay.
Can I ask just a clarification? Are you looking for K-12 in
No, actually just high school.
9 through 12?
Yes, sir.
If you would touch base with Ms. Knapp, she can get your information and contact and help you with that request. We can take care of that for you.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Is that okay? President Bell, thank you.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Do I need to wait till the end of the meeting for that, or can I
Nope,
do that now?
She'll talk to you right now.
Okay, all right, I didn't want to interrupt the meeting, though.
Happy to do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker for this evening is Dr. T.E. Morris.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. T.E. Morris. I'm a parent in the district and the president of We Rise. There are a few issues I wish to address. First, I am constantly amazed at the ineptitude and inadequacy of this body. 2 weeks ago, y'all ended the school board meeting early due to an unwillingness to enforce your own policy of wearing a mask inside district buildings. Yet, when audience members wanted to remain in the room to hear the comments of parents who had come to speak, Dr. Kellogg threatened to have the police escort us out of the building. Your actions demonstrate a lack of moral fortitude to preserve the integrity of this meeting space and a seeming desire to thwart public engagement that would highlight your failings and incompetence. Disturbing, but unfortunately, this behavior is consistent with previous board actions, or perhaps inaction is a more apropos word. Second, I am speaking in solidarity with the parents of children who have been subjected to racial harassment by peers who face little or no repercussions for their racist actions, and students who endure racial harassment with little or no intervention from teachers or administrators. My daughter was one of these children nearly a decade ago when she was a student in Westerville City Schools. I am also speaking tonight in solidarity with students who have experienced sexual assault in our schools, and with the parents who have come forward to demand justice for their children and accountability from the district. I stand with those who have had the courage to speak up, as well as those who are still suffering from their trauma in silence. I am appalled at the myriad ways this district has failed and continues to fail our children, while lauding yourselves for measures such as implementing equity teams and increasing enrollment of Black and brown students in AP classes. That is the bare minimum of what needs to be done, and the fact that it has taken this long in the district to reach this point is telling. If you have decades of experience, then you should have a better understanding of systemic racism in this country's educational institutions, including those in Westerville. You should understand the ways that rape culture and toxic masculinity permeate our society and institutions, and you should be doing a better job to eliminate the daily injustices in our schools that stem from racist, sexist, and heterosexist oppression. You have yet to even have something as basic as community-wide listening circles with students of color and their parents about the racism and harassment they face. Our schools are supposed to be safe places where students are nurtured and loved, but they are not for many students, especially Black and brown students and gay, trans, and gender nonconforming students. I am not interested in one-on-one conversations with individuals in this group that give the appearance of being listened to but result in no action. Such private, undocumented conversations foster misinformation and are tactics of misdirection. I want transparency and accountability. And if you want the Black Parents Association to support you, then you need to publicly advocate for and support the needs of Black students. A few weeks ago, I taught a piece by the late Black poet, lesbian poet and scholar Audre Lorde, titled "The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action," where she discussed the need to articulate truth, regardless of how scary or painful it might be. She stated, quote, "My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you." This is a message we must heed. The problems of racism and sexual assault that are happening in Westerville schools are not new. What is new is that I am not going to acquiesce to these injustices with my silence anymore. I applaud the parents and students who are speaking up about the injustices they experience or witness, and encourage others to do the same. Well, not the faux patriots who reinforce heterosexism, racism, and transphobia. But we collectively are demanding accountability and transparency from the school board. We are demanding that you do better. We are demanding that you do your job, that you support educators in teaching the truth, that you protect the most vulnerable of our students, and hold teachers and administrators accountable who fail to do so, that you hold people who violate our children accountable, both students and teachers, that you operate with integrity and in the best interest of our students, and not simply to placate a vocal fringe desiring to maintain the status quo of racism, heterosexism, transphobia, and fear of science. And members of the school board, your silence will not protect you either.
Our next speaker for this evening is Peg Duffy.
Early in tonight's meeting, you approved minutes of a regular meeting held 2 weeks ago and a special meeting last week. The regular meeting agenda was amended to cover only items requiring board approval, as was alluded to by the previous speaker. Item 602 on the original agenda, naming the schools, was not called upon because it did not require board approval. So then what constraint in the short time of 1 week necessitated a special meeting for immediate action on one agenda item, naming the schools? Incidentally, the online agenda for that meeting gave no indication of the top names resulting from the thought exchange, top names that were under consideration. The lone board member casting a no vote on the elementary naming clearly stated the objection was not to the name, but to the process. A process that says to the community, the board doesn't listen. Just heard that, didn't we? Yes, a process that we've seen all too often where community input is outvoted by a small group. To the other board members who waffled, the motion on naming the elementary could have been tabled for 1 week. 1 week to tonight's regular meeting when community members might have been prepared and expected to attend and comment. For the record, I have no objection to the name. I too earned an MLS just prior to the degree expanding to library and information science. At any rate, it's long overdue recognition for librarians. My objection is to the process you have used to reach the naming of the elementary. I have to wonder if this was a pre-election ploy to get names and faces in the news, a photo op maybe. Precedent in the district shows a chosen school name can be changed. Many are not aware that the new high school that opened in the fall of 1960, the one we now know as South, was originally named Lowell. Community opposition resulted in it returning to the name of Westerville High School. Mr. Dorn's report tonight, I didn't count how many times, talked about staying off the ballot as long as possible. There is time to redeem yourselves. Pay attention to the process you use in decision-making. A board that doesn't listen shouldn't be surprised when at the next levy request, the community doesn't listen either.
Our next speaker for this evening is Sharon Shy.
Ms. Marshall, I owe you an apology for the last meeting when I yelled at you in the parking lot. That was inappropriate, so I'm very sorry. I'm here to speak about the safety and security of our students at our schools. You guys apparently think it's very important. My comments could be triggering for anyone who has suffered sexual abuse. My student was sexually groomed by a Heritage Middle School teacher. I'm going to try to remove the names from my stuff that I wrote down. In the 2019-2020 school year, my student told another teacher about what was happening and was ignored. Later, my student told a psychologist who filed a children's services report. At that time, which was last January 2021, I called Heritage Middle School to tell the principal about the CCS report and about what the teacher did to my student. I gave the principal the following details. In class, the teacher, on separate occasions and over several months in front of other students in class, adjusted my student's bra strap. He put his head on my student's shoulder. He rubbed my student's back. And he ran his finger up and down my student's bare leg when they wore shorts. This happened many times over several different classes over several months. I discussed with the principal how the teacher's behavior was sexual grooming. It was an inappropriate power play to take advantage of a weak student who didn't have equal standing to say no to him. The principal said he couldn't believe that something like that could happen and discussed what he would do to investigate and figure out what would happen to the teacher. I hung up the phone, then radio silence, nothing, for 3 months. In March 2021, I contacted the principal by email. I again detailed the misconduct, and we set up a phone call to talk. The principal told me over the phone that the teacher blatantly denied my student's allegations and that he had hurt feelings. What about my student's feelings and what it did to her? I learned the teacher, during this phone call, I learned the teacher would retain his teaching position because, according to the principal, the district wouldn't do anything about the claims of a single student and there wasn't anyone else to corroborate the story. The next month, in April of 2021, 3 other students came forward to accuse the same teacher of similar sexual misconduct, and he was put on leave from his position at Heritage. Then summer happens, and the teacher returns to his teaching post in the fall of August 2021 with full access to groom more students. Through this whole time, I was never contacted by Westerville Schools for input, questioning, nothing, for any investigation, to answer any questions, or to be given any information that he was on leave, that he had returned to school, nothing, even though I had been a complainant in this. After the last school board meeting, when it was shut down and I wasn't given a chance to speak, I filed a police report with the Westerville Police Department about the misconduct. And I learned from the police department that as of that date, which I think was October 12th, Westerville City Schools had no report of my complaint against this teacher. The principal did not record my complaint. But that's okay. I have proof of my complaint because I have an email chain with him responding to my allegations and setting up the phone calls. I also learned today from the Ohio Department of Education that they have no records whatsoever of any misconduct or disciplinary action taken against this teacher by Westerville Schools. The ODE said if disciplinary action is taken against an educator, it's protocol for the school system to file action with them. So I think a few things could have happened. There was no discipline, or there was discipline and the school district isn't reporting the misconduct to keep them from getting investigated by the state. My conclusion is that either way, someone's covering up sexual misconduct by a teacher who 4 students have come forward against. And I know that many other students have not come forward because they're afraid. Which makes me ask, can we trust you? Can we trust this administration? My personal experience says no.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay. What's going on with the football team at Central? What's going on with
Thank
the
you
football
very
team at
much.
North? The rapes?
Moving on, to continue with our agenda, moving on to agenda item 13, which are board comments. Who would like to begin this evening? Altman?
I will go first. Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers for being here. I have said in a previous meeting, and I would like to hear some follow-up on this offline, Dr. Kellogg. I've requested that we look at evidence-based training, that we look at putting into place training across the district regarding these issues, that I've suggested several evidence-based programs that I've reached out to an expert at Ohio State University about, she's an expert in the field of sexual assault prevention. And these things are not okay. They're not okay. I've talked about toxic masculinity, and that these are things that we have to work with students on. We need to have good procedures, solid procedures when we're reacting to an incident, but what we really need to do is address these things from the ground up. We need to educate our students. We need to give them the opportunity to see that these are toxic behaviors, to understand that student-to-student behaviors. We need to help our students understand their rights. We need to help them understand what they can do when something has happened, and that they should have an expectation of follow-through. And that was the next thing out of my mouth. Yep, we need to also build this into our teacher professional development. And so these are things I've asked for before, and I know that things are being worked on behind the scenes. I would like an update on where we are with looking at those programs, at looking at how we bake those into our regular schedule of trainings, because we're constantly bringing new staff members on, and I don't want anyone to miss this information. We can assume that teachers and staff should know the rules, but it's our job to make sure that we are conveying those. So thank you for bringing your stories. I would really appreciate, and I know we can't do this here, I'd appreciate follow-up on the situation that Ms. Shai alluded to, and knowing what did and didn't happen, what the district does and doesn't have recorded. And I realize these are private personnel issues. So as a board member, I just would appreciate that follow-up. But these things are really not okay. And I know we have trainings in place, but I really just have to stress we need evidence-based trainings, and they need to be across the board, and they need to be consistent, and they need to be regular. And everybody in the community needs to be able, part of the reason I push for sort of national evidence-based programs is that A, they're evidence-based, we know they work, but also their outcomes are, there is research on their outcomes, right? Their content is available, so we can all feel secure in what our students and our staff are being trained on, and we can understand what the content is. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Altman.
Want me to go?
Sure, if you'd like to.
Jen, I agree with you 100%. Fully on board with all of that training for our staff, for our students, knowing what to expect. I guess I'm going to ask for a couple updates where we're at as far as a couple meetings ago. I think it was September 13th, we asked for an external evaluation of our extracurriculars. I'm wondering where we're at with that first.
As I put in the board update last week, and this is now a little bit confusing for me, because what the resolution was as Ms. Davidson said, an audit of our athletic and extracurricular programs as it relates to programming, training, policies, et cetera. We have pursued that and have, working with a firm to contract with them to do that with that definition. But then what Mrs. Altman has suggested involves not an audit of the program, but an implementation of programming before the audit. So not for here. So the update is, yes, we're working on a proposal from a firm to do the audit as was described to me. If we're headed down the wrong path, then I think we need to review the information I've shared with the board to date so that we can get right what it is we're looking for. So I'm a little.
Can I respond to just clarify? It's just that those things happened in the reverse order. So I brought information and a request for evidence-based programs to the meeting before Mrs. Davidson asked for the audit. So
The resolution was an audit, was for
Right.
the audit.
Right.
I'm trying to make sure I understand what the board's asking for. So in response, I thought that's what I was providing the board, have given to the board in the update. If I'm on the wrong path, then we need to clarify that so I can get on the right path and give the board what they're looking for. If it's on me not understanding, that was a board meeting I happened to miss. I appreciate the clarification, but in terms of the update, that's where we're at. I've provided the board information about a firm we're working with, some costs associated with that so we can budget for it, and an implementation piece. But if I'm headed down the wrong path, I apologize, and I'd like to get it right.
I think you are headed down the right path with the external audit. I was assuming we would have a couple different firms to choose from, so that's my bad for not engaging there. I was hoping that that would come back to the whole board. If we could look at that a little bit more deeply, that would be great. I would appreciate that. As far as training, I mean, we can tell from community members coming, we need to do both pieces. So whether the external audit comes first or the training simultaneously, I think the motion was for extracurriculars, but I do think we need to address some things, especially with our staff and our students in there somehow. And I don't know how that can happen at this point. So both pieces. I'm also going to refer back to the rest of the questions I asked on the 13th. How do we notify families and victims of outcomes? And, well, I'll start with that one first.
You're going to have to give me time to prepare to bring that forward for you. These are multiple policies and pieces that are in place, so I'm happy to provide that to the board. So I would happy to address that. In general, notification about the outcomes for the victim would have, come from the principal in terms of the disciplinary action. There are limitations to what we can share in terms of what we've done with the student who was the perpetrator. But in general, notification would come from the principal to the family that they're working with through that conversation.
Okay. So we,
And then there are, of course, other agencies as well, law enforcement, and child protective services, who do their own investigations, who have their own system of communication back to families, and may include us in what they share with those families, depending on the nature of the act, nature of the complaint.
so I did ask these on the 13th, and I think you were planning to bring them back on the 11th.
You want to ask away.
Okay, so I think the community needs to hear more about the process, and I think we also need to know who in the building is doing the investigating. Is it someone within the building?
Investigations of a discipline nature involving students will be conducted by our trained administrators, who are obligated by policy and by law to do those investigations per policy and by law, and that's who the main source would be, oftentimes with additional support from our district staff as needed, depending on the complications of the case. In parallel with other agencies like the law enforcement or child protective services who operate under their own guidelines. So our investigations at the primary level, in most cases, will be done by the principal. There are due process rights that parents have in regarding to suspensions and expulsions that they can exercise if they feel that an inappropriate outcome has come. And for parents who feel their complaint was inadequately addressed by the building administrator, they certainly can bring that forward to that building principal's supervisor, would be the executive director. It gets more complicated when you get into very specific types of investigations, specific as it relates to Title IX. So there are multiple facets, but in general, the initial complaint will be addressed by the building principal.
Okay, so does the building principal then report that to anyone higher up? I mean, is there a log kept or records kept for this?
Depends on the nature of what we're talking about, the nature of the investigation, but yes, they should document what they're doing. In some cases, by policy, there are actual forms, for example, in bullying and intimidation, there are actual forms that have to be completed and shared with people, all baked into our current policies. Title IX is a different set of expectations in terms of documentation. But yes, there should be records kept in order to make sure that a thorough understanding has come. And then absolutely there's the outcome, disciplinary pieces that are part of a student's file, not ever part of their permanent file. That's always a misunderstanding. Discipline issues are not part of a student's permanent file. They're just part of a school file. So yes, there should be documentation of those pieces. And that's what our administrators are trained to do as they come through their training as administrators, is how to conduct investigations, how to document those, who to include, referring to board policies, and seeking advice and support from district office officials, particularly if we're talking about a personnel item. Now we're with HR and human resources. If we're talking about student, it may have to do with the executive director. It may be in consult with our mental health team, Tammy Sant and her team, if we're looking at providing support to students there. It may come from Mr. McElroy, who's here this evening, as it relates to school safety and his interaction with law enforcement. So it is an all hands on deck. The more complicated the situation, the more resources we'll bring to understanding what happened and try to get to resolution.
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around some of this. Some of these, I guess it concerns me that colleagues are interviewing colleagues or investigating colleagues. But
An
again,
administrator is responsible for the supervision and evaluation of
I get that.
employees, and so they
Yep.
would be required to do that. Employees, of course, are also provided protection under their contract and have a right to representation from their association, as well as legal counsel, which is often the case.
Okay. So I'm probably going to have more questions later. I need to process.
Okay.
Mr. Velardo or Dr. Nestor Baker?
Ms. Altman, I think, brings some valid points to the table, as you have in the past, with some ideas about some evidence-based organizations' work that they do, because clearly these stories are disturbing disappointing and cannot continue. And for people to feel like we are not saddened, moved, I would just say I'm appreciative of people coming forward, even when they think that I'm not. I'm appreciative of the voices. And I'm thankful for when people talk to me, one-on-one conversations that I actually think is a good thing, because it brings people face to face and you can share pretty authentically as opposed to just sharing from a script. I am thankful when people are willing to have those kind of conversations and work their way through that, because that can be hard. But Ms. Altman, again, has done some good work behind the scenes and has some authenticity to what she's trying to bring to the table. So I think Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, I think the team, I think we just continue to look at these issues and try to, I know we do, I guess what keeps sticking in me is something we have said before. Somebody faces a problem, and we have a policy about that. Well, that only goes so far when you're the one facing the problem. We have a policy, which is a good thing, right? That is a good thing. But when your heart is aching over your child or over groups of children struggling, sometimes you don't want just the policy pointed to. You want the flesh and blood buy-in of, yes, we have training, yes, we have policies, but apparently some of those policies and trainings need to be beefed up, strengthened, and some resources brought in perhaps to really address. So I know that the administrative team really is trying to figure this out. But I also know that that falls on deaf ears. So we just continue to work.
There isn't a lot I can add to what has already been said. I think where I struggle personally is in what I cannot know, for legal reasons. You know, it would be easier for me to know what happens if I knew everything that law enforcement knows, or if I knew everything that personnel knows. And I can't, and I know that. But I think that it would be helpful to all of us, those of us who sit here and those of us who sit elsewhere, to have a clearer understanding, and Tracy, I think these are some of the questions that you're asking, to have a clearer understanding of what happens. We can't give specific information sometimes, but we can say with a little more clarity, here's the way it works. And yes, there are a lot of layers. You can't say it's always A, B, C. Sometimes it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and sometimes it's 1, 2, 3, 4. But to identify how we can talk about what does happen or what is supposed to happen when something goes so terribly wrong. And when we all have, we're all operating from a similar understanding, then it becomes more fruitful to identify what needs to be done and what needs to, at our particular levels and, as we each operate, what do we each need to be doing to make things better? I don't have answers at all. I do think it would help also to have a sense of what all our teachers and administrators, our classified staff, our coaches and so forth, receive training in, so that we have a sense of what is done. Because if you don't have any sense of what either is done or what is supposed to be done, then again, we don't know what we need to do that we're not. We can't find the cracks. So I am struggling to use your phrase, Tracy, wrap my head around knowing all of the pieces that I can know and identifying where we should be moving that we aren't, where we are moving that it's not aware, that there isn't an awareness that we're moving, and what we do and what we should do. And that's a tough one. There's a lot of stuff in that particular basket. So I have no answers. I want to know.
Thank you. I would just like to say to the families, the students that have been affected, how deeply saddened and sorry that I am for what has occurred and the experience that you have had. I can pledge to continue to become educated about the process, and in short, to do better, because we can do better. And so that I commit to and pledge to. And so I want to thank all of those that have come forward to share their experiences with us. Because had you not shared your experiences with us, we would not know. I wouldn't know. One other thing that I wanted to share during this time is to also bring a brief update, to update the board and the community about our participation in the Vouchers Hurt Ohio process. Last week, I was able to meet with and participate with the steering committee for the Vouchers Hurt Ohio lawsuit, where there was continued discussion and evaluation of the complaint that is being drafted to be filed. Significant progress has been made, and work continues with legal counsel to fine-tune the defining of the constitutional claims and the other legal framework for the complaint that is to be filed. The suit is very close to being ready for filing, and I'll continue to keep you updated on that process as it moves forward. But things are moving in a positive direction. And so that's the Vouchers Hurt Ohio lawsuit that earlier this year, this summer, we passed a resolution to participate in and to be a part of. And so if you have any more questions about that, you can feel free to reach out, let me know, and I can get you information. If I don't have it, I can get it for you. Moving on to agenda item 14, times, dates, locations of next meetings. The board will meet in regular session on Monday, November the 22nd, 2021 at 6 o'clock p.m. at the Early Learning Center located at 936 East Wind Drive, Westerville. As a reminder, space will be limited to 50 people to comply with health and safety protocols based on CDC guidance. Mask and facial coverings will be required, and social distancing will be observed. Moving on to agenda item 15, which is adjournment. May I please have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Velardo?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes. And with that, we are adjourned.